So that's amazing. Let's talk a little bit more about that transition because that had to be, I mean, kind of monumental. You go from a season of paying your coaches or your community leaders to care for these small group hosts, these small group leaders, and now you're saying no more dough. How did they respond, and what happened after that?
Well, I mean, part of it you always have to look to the why, and so there's a couple things. Everything's got pros and cons, and actually, when I'm coaching churches, I would still going back. I would go to paying them. We paid them for 10 hours, and we did it for a couple different reasons. One is budgetarily, we couldn't hire another small group pastor, and when you look at the pragmatics of what you pay them, a full-time employee in benefits and everything, I could get 8 community leaders to one full-time pastor that was over small groups. So there was a budgetary restraint that was driven on it. Another thing that was a practical thing was the reason why we did that was so that we could get the culture to change a little bit quicker. We had more people who were engaged higher with that. So it wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but I will tell you, it's not scalable. And when churches want to go into something like this, it is something that you just got to go into it open-eyed saying, this scales, but not as big as you'd like. And the problem is that, at one point in time, we had 54 paid community leaders in our community. And it just wasn't something we could just say, hey, for every 25 groups, we're paying a 10-hour person. And so there came a break in it. So there's a budgetary hit that forced us to make that decision. And then the other thing that was the hit was obviously the budgetary was the scalable piece. But the other thing we learned is that as pure as people are, and Derek, people just aren't as pure as you and me, out there. but what happened is that they would get into that 10-hour paid position for all the right reasons, but they got very used to that little bit of extra dough, as you say, and it was hard for them to walk away from it. So they get in it for the right reasons, but they wouldn't get out of it for the right reasons. And so what happened is that we realized that, your accountability to them needs to stay just as high because the purity of what got them in sometimes wasn't as pure of getting out. So that was a little bit of a thing. And it just really wasn't scalable. And so we ramped up our retreats knowing that we were going to go into this next phase. And really in version 3.0, not a whole lot changed from that whole aspect of how we were using community leaders. And in my book, Small Groups with Purpose, chapter 14, I go into it in great detail. So if you go into Small Groups with Purpose, chapter 14, you kind of see version 2 and you see version 3. But what happened was just like what you said and you alluded to is, we went volunteer. And the cool thing is that there were about 2/3 of the community leaders stayed on board. They go, hey, it's a little bit of an adjustment, but we'll stay on board. There was about 1/3 that said, you're from Satan, and we're jumping out of this. But what we did is we expanded, to the volunteers. We had to work on recruiting a lot better, and with that, but it's enough of a change that I would actually give it its own version of how we had to reimagine it, because it was scary, because you were telling people, hey, at such and such a date, we're not paying you anymore. And it was just not scalable, and it just wasn't being a good steward of what the church was talking about. So the version 3, pretty much the same, but it's where it was a tectonic shift, because it expanded us to different realms where today we have roughly about 280 community leaders. And so you see there that, it just wouldn't be financially doable.
So then we've got, I think, version 4.0 starting around 2014. And this is where you guys introduced this Starbucks green apron thing. This is very interesting. Tell us more about the Starbucks apron piece.
Yeah, it was a wild piece of it, and I forgot in version 3. One of the things that we did was we also changed the span of care from 1 to 25 as we went volunteer. We said whatever you could do. So that was just one other piece of that. Okay, Green Apron. Let me jump into that. Yeah, one of the things that in version 4.0 that we started to notice with our groups is that with our community leaders is that they weren't sure exactly what to do. And so what we discovered is that they were trying to do what we wanted them to do. And because
which is smart.
Yes, which is smart, which do. But one of the things that's my strength is I know what to do intuitively. But one of my weaknesses is I think everybody knows what to do intuitively, and that can many times hurt you. And so what we discovered is that most of our group leaders were getting a little not burned by our community leaders, but they were just feeling like, hey, they're always hammering us for content and stuff, and how many's on the roster, and did you do leader training 1? Did you do leader training 2? Did you complete your new host training? Have you done the health assessment? Have you done the group assessment? And what we discovered is that our community leaders would gravitate towards doing what we wanted them to do without building a friendship. So we created this our version of the Starbucks Green Apron booklet, which if you didn't know what that was, when Starbucks was first starting out, in the green apron that they would always wear, there was a little pocket that they would have, and there was a green apron booklet that they would have in there. And it was kind of like a quick cheat sheet on making a lot of the drinks. And I know they've moved away from that, but it was still a great concept to have, and something that we picked up on. And so we created a kind of a cheat sheet of what their role was. And it would boil down to 3 words. How do you become their friend? How do you help them be a great leader? And how do you coach them for the future of what we want them to do? And in each one of these words, friend, leader, and coach, was an acrostic, because that's what Saddleback does. And so in the friend part, we had here's 6 ways that you can become their friend. Like the F was, find common ground. And then we'd explain what finding common ground meant and why that was so important. And then we'd give them some ideas on how to find common ground. And then in each one of those letters was pretty much the same thing, but it was a handy little booklet that would kind of help usher us into the next zone of saying, hey, there's got to be some simple pathways. And a couple other things that we learned in this is teaching them the difference between hard data and soft data. And hard data is basically the information we want. And that's what they went towards all the time. They would go after, like, Derek, if I was your group leader, I'd go, gosh, the church wants me to do this. I want to please the church. And so this is what I'm going to go for. And I'm going to ask you for all this hard data that the church wants. And what we had to do was we had to do a paradigm shift in this particular version, saying, we want you to go after soft data. And soft data is the data that's important to you. And basically we came up with them in, discovering soft data is going through, again, another acrostic called SPEAK. And that is, find out, what's their story, and just discover who they are. So I'd want to find out, Derek, what's your story? How'd you find Christ? How'd you meet Julie? Tell me about your kid that you have, and you tell me about Azariah, and you'd be all this information you'd share and stuff like that. So I'd want to find out your story. The P was, what are you passionate in? And, I say, hey, dude, you're passionate about college football. You pick a sucky team, but hey, we'll still go with that.
Ouch.
Oh, man. But,
I like that.
We could digress on that forever and a day. But I want to find out what you're passionate about and see if there's, any common ground in there. And then I want to find out, how can I encourage you? I mean, did I spell it right? SPE. Yeah. How do I encourage you? With all that, then I want to see, what abilities do you have? And one of them we discovered is that you in technology and Communication was huge. That you have a natural ability with that, and how can you use that for the kingdom work? And then the K is just, what are you knowledgeable on that I'm not knowledgeable on, so I can learn from you. But there's a lot that is in that hard and soft data learning that was there in this particular version. And then just another piece that was really tectonic for us in this one was, and one of the things that I always heard from my staff was, hey, when you call leaders, it triggers, or a CL was always getting triggered, if we dip down below into the level they're on. And what I learned from Cheryl Bachelder, who used to be the CEO of Popeye's Chicken, who did a great job of turning that franchise around, but she talked to me about this thing called skip level. And it was really from one of our presidents who used to always say, trust but verify. And that's what it was. But when you skip leveled, what she learned is that when she would go to a store, she would learn one set of data from store managers. She would learn another set of data from store customers. And during this particular version, we helped the culture get comfortable with skip leveling, that if even I, who I am, 3 levels removed from a group leader, but if I called a group leader, the community leader, or the small group pastor, or the campus pastor, connections pastor on that staff, they wouldn't get triggered by it because they know I am their best friend. I'm not playing the detective to get there, but I am going to be able to help them out. So it was a wild reimagining of what we were doing in the coaching arena. So it was a wild time. I will just say that, because it should have been tectonic probably 2 versions ago, but we're slow to the game.
Yeah, on the skip leveling, I think one of the keys with that working in a healthy way is, like you, for example, Steve, as a leader,